I'm Brittany Rizzo, and welcome to My Only Friends. On today's episode, I had the absolute delight of talking with Barry Lee Moe. Barry is an Emmy Award-winning hairstylist, mostly known for his work on Ryan Murphy's Hollywood, Pose, and my personal favorite, Pam and Tommy, where he recreated Pamela Anderson's iconic look to a T. This episode reminds me of the Friends episode, the one with Ross's sandwich. Phoebe decides she's ready to go back to school as an adult because she never got the high school experience. Barry and I talk about what it was like for him to step back into his high school and be honored, and how he is always a student to life and his craft. I learned so much from my interview with Barry, and it really inspired me. He is incredibly thoughtful and well-spoken, and I love the way he talks about the way movies and TV truly affect him and help him learn who he is in a deeper way. Everything he had to say was informative and admirable. Please enjoy my conversation with Barry Lee Moe. How are you? Good morning.
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm really excited. I'm excited.
I am too, I think. I mean, it's such a fascinating topic to discuss, I think, because I think we all lean into TV and movies, especially creative people, to cope with things. But to pinpoint like different things from your life that helped you, and looking back at 44 years old, trying to think of some of those things that affected me when I was younger, it's hard to remember because we kind of block things out, you know?
Right.
But it was fun to kind of look back and think about that stuff.
Right. I know it's always so interesting because there's different shows when I was younger, like there's such a specific period of time for each one, or like kind of like albums. Like I'm a huge Swiftie. So her being on like the Eras tour, every time she like plays one of her old songs on like the surprise song nights, I'm like, oh God, that reminds me of that boyfriend and that breakup. Or when I was just like, it's so funny how it just, one album is like, oh, that was the time in my life where all this was happening so much. And to kind of go back there and then also watch things or listen to things as an adult, when you have much more wisdom and like clarity and hindsight, you hear things or see things completely differently than you did when you were, you know, a kid.
100%. That's why I love collecting books, because I love to revisit books years later when I'm at a different time in my life, because they impact you differently.
That's so funny you said that, because while I was like waiting for you to come on, I have my computer set up on like a stack of books, and I was like, I should probably read some of these.
I know, we collect them though. I'm a big collector of books, and I'm always picking things up, or, you know, when I see friends reading something, I'll write it down and order it. And then I just amass this collection of books. And it's great when it's summertime and I'm not working and I can read by the pool. But when you're busy, there's just no time. When I lived in New York, I read constantly on the train, because you have that, you know, built-in time. Right.
We're like now in LA, you're in your car, you have podcasts or audiobooks.
Exactly, which is great too. And some audiobooks are, you know, I prefer to reading the actual book, just because I like to hear the inflection of the person who wrote it, and if they're reading their audiobook, but it's always more interesting.
Yeah. Now, are you from LA? Where are you from originally?
No, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and I went to high school there. I went to college there, and then I moved to Chicago for probably 2 years, which was kind of that like post-college, what the fuck am I doing? You know, like I had went to college for acting, performance, like I was a music theater major, and I met a costume designer pretty quickly there during my work study, building costumes for shows, who had introduced me to wigs and makeup. And that's when I kind of first got my hands dirty with hair and started kind of playing with it, and fell in love and started doing internships every summer. And acting kind of became this thing that was less interesting to me. I still finished my degree and I still performed in all the shows, but I was also designing all the shows. So I started kind of diving into my creative brain in a different way very early on in college. So when I left college, I wanted to keep doing that. And I thought Chicago would be a great place to do it. But I had no idea what it was like there. And it's really not a city like New York or LA where you just kind of start working on projects just by networking and being around people, because there's not as much going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And there is such a small network there that people know kind of where the jobs are and things already. So there wasn't as much opportunity. Plus, I was just out of college and I was just trying to kind of find my footing as an adult for the first time with no money and living with friends. It was just a party. You know, we all kind of go through that transition time. And then I moved to New York after that and was there for 15 years before moving here 5 years ago.
So when did you go to cosmetology school?
I went to cosmetology school. I think I was somewhere between the age of 28 and 30. I went when I was working on Broadway and touring with Tori Amos. And I would kind of do this cycle where I would tour with Tori Amos for 6 months. Then she would take a break for a year, work on a new album. And in that interim time, I would work on Broadway because when I first moved to New York, I started building wigs in a studio for two designers Chuck LaPointe and Tom Watson, who build and design all the wigs for like Wicked, Hamilton, like Color Purple, all of these, hundreds and hundreds of Broadway shows. So we were constantly building wigs and they started putting me on their shows, running them as the department head on Broadway. And I just kind of had this thing going where I would tour and then I would come back and work on Broadway, but it was very much the same always. Like nothing was changing because I was working with the same artist and I was doing someone else's work on Broadway, facilitating, the restyling of their wigs. And it just felt like I was stuck, kind of felt like I'd hit a plateau and I wanted to be doing my own stuff. And working with Tori opened my eyes to all of the editorial world and fashion magazine shoots and album covers. And I was so lucky to be able to do a lot of that with her, but it made me realize that if I want to keep doing this, like I want to be legit, and I want to, and I need to be licensed. So I bit the bullet and we finished a tour and I just decided it's now or never. And I took 8 months of my life and I was unemployed and broke, which was nuts because I had just been living the life. And then to have that reality check to just kind of come back to nothing and be a student again was really humbling. But I promised myself that I was going to approach the education as if I knew nothing and as if I had no experience, because I wanted to really have open eyes to everything that they were going to teach and make sure I got the most out of it. And being a student as an adult, I think is kind of a benefit in some ways because you look at the process differently than when you're 18.
Absolutely. I mean, I have my cosmetology license and
oh, nice.
Yeah. And I wish that I went when I was a little bit older. I basically wanted out of high school so bad because I just hated it. And all my friends had graduated and the deal was okay, if you want to graduate early, you have to pick up a trade. And I just had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just did not want to be in school anymore. And I went to cosmetology school, but then I just fucked around. I was 17 and there was everybody else was 25 plus and I was the baby of the group. So it was I was trying to keep up with all these older people, not realizing that they're probably taking this a lot more serious than I am. Cause I'm just out living my life, having so much fun. And I had the question of when you were talking, you said you were an actor in musical theater. And when you shifted from doing that to hair, did you have this feeling, and maybe this is just me projecting, because it took me a really long time to realize, Brittany, hair is what keeps you out in LA. Your cosmetology license is what has provided you this job to keep pursuing acting, to keep pursuing the career that you're trying to build your life around. But I always would feel if I took a job in anything other than my passion, I was just giving it up. And I was I was a failed actor, so I had to do this. And so I would be so hard on myself, where now with a perspective change, I'm my job allows me to meet so many people, including, a lot of the guests who have been on my show are all people I've met at the salon that I work at, which is incredible. And we've created these amazing friendships and everything. So that long-winded way of saying, did you have any sort of internal struggle of being but I don't want to give up acting, and does this mean I quit?
I didn't really. It was kind of a light bulb moment for me because I hadn't really felt fulfilled as an actor in the way that I did when I designed my first show. And the way it came about was I went to a Catholic college that had a really strong performing arts program. So 25% of the population of the school was the performing arts program. So we, kind of dominated this small little private Catholic college. And I was just working in the costume shop, and this designer, Jeffrey, he brought me this box of wigs that had been donated from the convent, because we had a convent on campus and we had nuns that taught us in school, which was a trip as well, because I'm not a religious person in that way. And he's like, we've got all these, he said they were wigs from nuns who had passed on. I don't know if I still believe that story, but that's what he told me, because he had a great sense of humor. So I always thought, hey, this is interesting way to upcycle things and make sure that we're not getting rid of them. And it was this production of Iolanthe, Rodgers and Hammerstein. And there are all of these fairies that, were different elements that we decided were going to be like air, earth, wind, fire. And so he wanted me to sculpt and hand paint all of these wigs into elemental sort of silhouettes that were representative of their attributes, and that, tied in with his costume designs. And so with Mod Podge and glue and all of these things, like I started sculpting these wigs in our scene shop. And then I spent like 2 months doing this, and it was such a fulfilling project. And I felt inspired in a way that I had never felt as an actor. Acting to me, although I was good at it and I was there on a talent scholarship, and singing was always like my thing from a very young age, it always felt like work to me. Like it always felt like I was trying to be better. And I think as an actor, this is common. Like you always feel like there's someone better than you and that you're never going to be good enough. And that, there's this sort of like constant struggle to be noticed as an actor. And I never have experienced that doing hair or makeup. Like I immediately felt like my work was recognized and received, and that I was doing something I was meant to do. Like it just made sense. So I started pouring more of my energy into that. And when I started to lose that feeling, once I started working professionally, that's when I decided to go to cosmetology school, because I felt like I needed a pause, like something to remind myself of why I started on this journey to begin with, and to kind of reignite that childlike flame inside of me, because that's what drives me as an artist, as a person, is just that sort of, childlike vision of things in the world, like looking at things with fresh eyes constantly and never not dreaming about possibilities. And I wanted to feel that again, because that's when I had my most inspired work, was when I was young. And I wasn't worried about, I didn't get that job, or I didn't get this job, or, I want to be doing this. Like I wasn't thinking about that, because when you're young, you're just excited to be working on whatever you're working on, because you're just, it's all new. And to me, I really want to maintain that feeling throughout my whole life. So I work hard still today to protect that, because I feel like the moment you lose that is when you become, just kind of this robotic worker that shows up and you do the work, you collect the paycheck, and then you go home. And it's this cycle of just uninspired existence that if more people were able to find and say hello to their passion in life and discover it, because we all have one, but a lot of people sadly don't have the opportunity to find what that passion is, or to exercise it, because they don't have the means, or the circumstances in their life are different, Yeah. And I think if everyone had the ability to, invest in their passion and what they're dreaming of, that we would be, just a happier group of people on this planet in general.
It's so true. And I really love that you said that, like how you try to do things that maintain that childlike spark. And I relate to that so much, because even the other day I was like, I'm sitting in my apartment. I'm 32 years old. I'm watching Boy Meets World. I painted my walls purple, like the friend's house. Like I have my Lego sets all over the place. Like it's all very childlike in an adult way. But I'm like, I just watched RuPaul's Architectural Digest last night. And he said the same thing. If your house should make you happy, you should look at it and feel happy. And like, I look at the things around me and they make me happy, and they make me feel like a little kid whose parents aren't home and I get to like run the roost. And it's like, that's what ignites me. That's what keeps my like childlike wonder going. And I think, like you said, it's so important to have, especially as we get older. I think I have come to the realization too, like we're all just big kids. None of us are really
Absolutely.
adults.
And especially when you get into the queer community or the LGBTIA community, because so much of our childhood is stolen, trying to fit into these boxes that our parents and society creates for us of who we should be or how we should act in this world. And we lose that time period that most, cis heteronormative people have the luxury of experiencing, that first crush, that first kiss, that flirtation on the playground, like the things that so many people have the opportunity to discover, like it's stolen from us because we have to pretend to flirt with a girl or a boy or someone that we are supposed to be, drawn to, instead of experiencing what we're actually feeling and identifying that and saying, oh, this is who I am. This is cool. I like boys, or I like girls, or I like everybody,
Yeah.
And I think also kids who are cis heteronormative kids who have traumatic childhoods, the same thing happens to them because parents who have kids at a young age or who aren't fully prepared to be parents, they're not investing in what the kid needs. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to make sure that everyone's still breathing, everyone's eating, and that they're paying their bills. So sometimes those little details of like, what do you like to do? What makes you passionate? Like those things are missing and we don't have the chance to truly develop because our parents are just trying to get by and keep the kids, get them to school and all of those things. So life gets in the way sometimes of these normal upbringings, quote unquote, that I think I always yearned for, like the kids at school that had access to money and had access to, dance classes, music classes, all these things that just weren't available to my family because we didn't have the means to do more than one. We had to pick one. And if you picked the wrong one and you hated it, well, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
And for me, that was like playing trumpet because we couldn't make it to the percussion class, which is what I wanted to go to. So my mom's like, well, we have to go to the brass introduction instead, and you can play one of those. And I was like, okay. And I hated it. And I never got good at it. And I never applied myself because I wasn't invested in it, And I think that's why as an adult, a lot of us remain in that childlike state too, because we're still figuring it out, Even at 44 years old, I walk around sometimes and I just think, when is life going to start? Like, I feel like I'm still figuring this all out.
Which is crazy because I look at you and I'm like, holy moly, look at all the incredible things that you've done. And I'm sure you recognize that, but I'm like, your life is like, it's definitely started from my eyes.
Well, it has. In terms of like, I guess when you look at things professionally, you see a list of accomplishments and you automatically, I think, assume that someone is completely fulfilled or they have everything they need, or especially in the entertainment industry, like people tend to assume like, oh, you must be super rich because you work with famous people. And you're like, no, that's not how this works.
Right.
Like they're rich. We're just here, helping them out and making them look good before they get on camera. And, that's the job. But it's, I think, a common misunderstanding when we look at and I do this too, when you look at other people's lives. Like there's a hairstylist that I really admire and look up to. And I was talking to him and we were just discussing, our journey in the business. And I look to his career as like, it's very aspirational to me, the things that he's doing. And it's something that like, I've kind of modeled my path in this business after. And talking to him, he feels like he hasn't done anything. And looking at me, he thinks that I've done everything he wants to do. So it's this weird conversation of perception that we just never really know how someone is, feeling in their process as an artist, whether successful or not, because what Instagram shows you or what a list of accomplishments shows you isn't necessarily reflective of where that person wants to be or where they want to go, But that being said, I'm super grateful for every opportunity I've had. And I've always approached every job that's come my way with that childlike energy and spirit, because I want to do my best. And I want to learn something and I want to be open to everything that job can give me.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment that I stop looking at opportunities like that, the ego gets involved. And then you become this sort of, I've got this, I'm so good. Look at what I've done.
Yeah.
I'm so like, people love me. And it becomes ego driven instead of passion driven, or it's not artistically driven. It becomes about like, this is who I am. Look at what I'm doing. And that's something that isn't just never resonated with me. Like, I'm very humble about what I've accomplished because I feel like there's so much more to do, but I also feel like there's so many more important things to focus on in this world than some things that everyone sort of prioritizes in this business or puts up on a pedestal. Like, I have to get an award. If I don't win an award or I don't get a nomination, then I'm worthless and, I'm not good. And I was at the Emmys last year sitting there and, just looking around the room and I'm thinking, this business is wild,
Yeah.
Like we do this many times a year where we gather all of these people who are already so privileged to be working in a business that pays well, has health benefits. There are a lot of perks. And now we're gathering in this room and we're all dressing up and we're celebrating ourselves for doing what we do. And it's very, it's weird to see sometimes when you think about it, because you're just like, we invest so much energy into getting here. And then we feel so much heartbreak when the outcome isn't what we want. If we lose or, and then you see people who win and they give speeches and you just hear them speaking and you think, is this what this is about? Like,
right.
Just like it seems very self-centered in a way,
yeah.
this business.
And I mean, the older I've gotten too, it's kind of like Jerry Seinfeld has said it best, like best what? Like this, it's all so subjective. Like what I think is the best is not what the person next to me is going to think is the best. And like everybody is putting in creative work and incredible work. So when somebody's winning best this, best actress, best hair and makeup, it's like, it's incredible to be recognized. But like you said, it's like, that's not why we do it. And that's not the end game of it all. And like, I think it's also like people think like once I win that or once I get there, my whole life is going to be fixed. I'm going to be happy now. I'm going to be this now. And I really loved that you, like going back a little bit when you kind of were like, well, what you see is different from what's going on. Like we see what's on Instagram, and it's just a really good reminder for anybody listening that it's like, whether it's we see somebody just bought a new house or we see somebody just win an award, like we don't really know what's going on in their lives ever. And some of those big moments can also be the loneliest times.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I think that's the danger in social media is there's this pressure. And we talk about this all the time in the industry because as hairstylists, makeup artists, whatever, we're kind of constantly comparing ourselves to this like instant flow of new photos of celebrities that people have had the luxury of working on and they've worked hard to get there. And it's all these amazing things they're doing. But if your feed doesn't reflect that, you can quickly feel depressed and worthless and feel like you're not doing enough, or why didn't I get to do this? Or why didn't they call me? And why? And it can be this cycle of like, instead of using it as a portfolio platform to just showcase some of your best work, it becomes this thing where like you are almost hungry for that dopamine rush that comes when you open Instagram or you open up a social media app and you see like the likes and you see someone interacting with you. Like it becomes this conflicted relationship where you're seeking approval from your phone and these digital strangers who have no impact on the life that you're living. Because when you shut your phone or you shut your computer, like I'm just in this house and I'm just with my dogs and I'm completely happy and content.
Yeah.
Like I don't care what anyone else thinks about what I've done. I'm happy to share it because I'm proud of it. And I've worked really hard to get where I am. But at the end of the day, like I realized, especially during COVID, the pandemic, the racial uprising in America, like all of those things that happened 2 years ago, working in the entertainment industry during that time opened my eyes to a lot. And it made me just realize that we're all just sort of cogs in this machine. No different than a car factory, making cars. Like, we're hired by these producers to, create this work, and some of the work is exploitative and some of it's super inspiring and rewarding. You just don't, you never know depending on what project you're on. But at the end of the day, it's just, I always say that it's important just to stay in your own lane in life and focus on what you need today to have a good day. What's going to make you happy today? What's going to bring some joy to your life? And the moment that we compare ourselves to other people and their journey, we start going down that road of just depressive, like unhealthy behavior. That's not kind. We're not being kind to ourselves.
Absolutely. And on the tail end of talking about social media, and especially with shows that you've worked on, you have worked on Pose, you've worked on Pam and Tommy, you've worked a lot with Ryan Murphy, you did Hollywood. I loved that show also, by the way. And Welcome to Chippendales, so many things. And especially with Pam and Tommy and Pose, like when you're really paying homage to a certain person or group of people, and the social media chatter is so loud if you don't do it perfect in their eyes. How do you deal with that pressure of like nailing it, getting it right?
Yeah, that's the biggest fear, especially when you're working on a biopic of someone well-known, someone who's been sort of in the zeitgeist of America, like Pam Anderson was forever, and everyone knows who she is. There was a lot of pressure there to make sure you get it right. But I think that I try to stay focused in the moment when I'm working on those shows and just try to show up and do the best that I can, not thinking about what other people are going to think. But then the day comes when the show airs or the first trailer drops. And although you've kind of been in this space of like, we created this beautiful world, we're really proud of it. As soon as you unleash it to the general public, then of course you have every troll in the world that comes out of the woodwork that thinks they could have done it better, or, that in the case of Pam and Tommy, there were a lot of people in our industry who were shaming us for working on the project without her consent, because they felt like we were part of the problem and that we were just furthering her trauma. And, that's not something that I have control over. The producers and the showrunners, they reached out to her many times to try to make her part of the project. And, whether her agents didn't give her the information or the desire to be involved wasn't there. I mean, we saw a little bit in her documentary about kind of her reaction to it, but that was in her hands to participate or not. And she chose not to. And that's completely understandable, because I wouldn't want to relive that trauma in my life either. But as a celebrity and someone who's in the public eye, like we don't get to control who makes a TV show or movie about us, unless they're basing it off of a book that you have rights to. And then obviously legally you can control it. But this was based off a Rolling Stones article that was written about the guy who stole the safe. So in those moments, you get online and you see all of this kind of hate coming at you. But when you kind of break through it, you realize there's a common thread there. And it's people who are perhaps jealous that they're not working on the project, people who are just constantly putting negative energy out into the world, and then people who have legitimate criticisms that some of them, were valid. And you can take those when you can feel that it's productive or it's a constructive criticism, then that stuff is valuable to read. But the other stuff, you start to like kind of push it aside. And if you are invested in the process and you've done everything you need to do and you feel proud of the work that you've done, then all of that stuff doesn't really mean anything, Right.
And with the whole Pam Anderson situation, for me, I totally see both sides of not wanting to relive that trauma. But I think that the show did such an incredible job of showing how awful the world was to her, and really like portrayed her as someone you wanted to protect and care for, especially seeing everything she had been through. It gave me so much more insight and knowledge about her. And I truly think that like that show is kind of helped in a way her career of people wanting to like, again, idolize her again and just seeing what a strong person she was. And like the world is like, we owe you an apology.
I agree. And I think, I don't want to take all the credit. Like our show can't take all the credit for her journey, but
right.
It did definitely bring the spotlight back to her. However traumatic it was to have that show out there, it brought her a new chapter. It started a new book for her, basically, because she was able to reclaim her story, and all of these opportunities started coming along. And to me, it was always like my biggest dream when we started that was to like, we always thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take Pam Anderson to the Emmys with us? And it never came true, but we just always in the back of our minds and hearts, like we had her best intentions in mind. And Lily James was very adamant about getting it right. And she was very instrumental in telling her story the right way. And she really did nurture Pam from afar, even though Pam didn't know that. And all of us had the same feeling, like we just wanted to do right by her. And we wanted people to see the power that existed in her as a woman, and that there is life after trauma, and that you can step out of it and become your own person and have a beautiful life and walk away from that. But no one really knows what that feels like except for her, and I think that's the danger in any biopic is like, do we need to see the Jeffrey Dahmer murders played out again in a TV series? I don't think we needed to, but it was really well done. Like they did a great job. And I think it opened people's eyes to another part of the story that maybe they didn't know. And information is valuable in any situation. And we live in a world where TV and movies are part of our lives. And it's part of how we exist on this planet. It's how we navigate our stress, how we check out when we need to, how we check in when we need to. And without the industry making these shows, these conversations wouldn't start, a lot of them.
Right.
And that's why they are valuable, no matter how many times we've seen, a biopic about, I don't know, I can't think of an example, but, anything that's been on Lifetime has probably been on another network and another network. And then there's been a movie about it,
Right. So growing up, when did you really see yourself in a character?
There were a lot of different times that I identified with people in movies and TV, but I don't think that I was aware of it at a young age. But I did start to like idolize different people in movies and TV when I was like during the summers when I was young. But I think the first time that I really saw myself in a TV show was a show like Will and Grace, at the time, that's all we had as young queer people. And that came out probably, I don't remember when, but I would say it was probably in the mid 90s.
Yeah, I think like 95, 96.
Yeah. I think I was probably maybe sophomore in high school or younger. And, it wasn't a conversation that we were having at my house because I didn't know what it was to be gay yet. Like I knew that I had feelings towards men, and I knew that it was complicated, but I didn't know how to process it. So I just continued on with my life as a hetero boy, dating girls, all of that stuff. But all the while, I was just trying to process these complicated feelings. And when you see a TV show like that, you start to think, okay, these are real people who are having same-sex relationships and they're happy. Like, this does exist.
Right.
And when you start to see that represented, then you start thinking outside of your small town life, and you think, well, maybe that's a possibility for me, but you don't really address it because you don't know how, because there isn't access to a community. Like my town was 15,000 people growing up, and we didn't have I can't think of like a single openly queer person growing up until I started getting involved in theater and stuff in high school. And then I started to kind of, build my little family. But it was just interesting to be able to see that on TV and to identify with the characteristics of certain people in these shows like Will and Grace, but not know how to kind of put that into motion in my own life. And because it wasn't something anyone was talking about then. And I was just back at my high school actually like 3 weeks ago, because they honored me and put me on their little wall of success, which was such a out of anything I've done in my life, like it was the most nerve-wracking experience of my life. Like I was terrified to go back because it just reminded me of a time in my life that was awful. And I had to speak at 3 different high schools, because there's 3 high schools now, and share my story. And, you know, I made it a priority to share like my honest, true story about being othered in high school and finding my way and still managing to become a whole normal human being many years later, with the help of community and friends and theater and music and all those things. But it was so weird to be back in those spaces and to see not only a ethnically mixed population of students, like not just white kids, like when I was there, but to see just different types of people being celebrated, you know, to have like, to see these kind of LGBTQIA clubs that they had in each school for kids to go, where there are resources, like the fact that even that existed, to see like a pride flag in a high school, it blew my mind. Like it just was like, if only I had had something like this when I was there, like it would have helped me jumpstart the journey a little bit faster. But, you know, I'm grateful that I got to where I am, how I got there, and I was meant to. But at the time, when you saw things like that on TV or in movies, you didn't really know what to do with that information if you didn't have parents who understood it and could talk to you about it, because we didn't talk about anything like that. We didn't even talk about, my parents bought me encyclopedias of sex education to teach us about anatomy in our bodies, and part of our book club. And that's how we were supposed to learn about
oh my gosh,
how to have adult relationships. You know, it was all very medical, and it was just not something we ever talked about. So
do you think that brought, like, did you carry a lot of shame? Especially, I feel like after, like you said, going to a Catholic school, like, did that breed any shame in you where you felt like you had to silence a part of yourself, or did it make you want to really be like, no, I got to get out of this and be who I am?
It was interesting because the moment that my parents dropped me off at the dorm, like they still say this, that I was so happy. Like I was not sad to see them go. I was like, peace, check out, bye.
Bye, girl.
Like I was gone.
Yeah.
And the moment I stepped foot into that dorm, like even though my roommate was a conservative, like straight-laced athlete in the dorm, I didn't care. I was just like, I felt so liberated leaving my hometown, my parents, and being on my own and going to school with theater kids. I just immediately felt safe. Like I didn't even look back. And obviously we had days on campus where, you know, there were religious studies students who would say things to us like, you know, you can still find God and, you know, have a normal life, things like that. And you're like, okay. But because we had such a strong tribe at my school, none of that fazed me like it did in high school. Like the comments and the teasing in high school really affected me. So much so that when I went back, like giving my speech, even hearing, and high school kids whisper through presentations in a mass assembly room, like they're going to, but even at 44 years old, hearing those little murmurs during my speech, I got so anxious that someone was talking negatively about me. And I told my mom afterwards, and she's just like, you're being crazy. I'm like, I just want you to know, like, this is so triggering to me in the weirdest way. Like I've worked with the craziest celebrities, like been around the world. Like I've lived a full life. And now back in this high school, I'm feeling the effects of this bullying and teasing that happened to me when I was here 25 years ago. And
because we're all just still big kids, truly.
Yeah. And it just goes to show you how much trauma really affects people.
Yeah.
And even though you work through it and you deal with it, whether through therapy or in your own ways, it still sits there in the back of you, and just tiny little things can bring it up. And it's wild to be aware of it and to see it kind of playing out.
Yeah. And so feeling that freedom as a theater, like being with those theater kids and feeling that safeness, I want to talk about how you got on to Pose, because I could imagine that working on that set too really was a very liberating feeling, because everyone is just who they are and being accepted for who they are.
It was. I mean, I was still new to the TV industry when I got called to work on that show. And
how did you get into the TV and film industry? I think we skipped over that entire part of like after cosmetology school. How did you get there?
So after after cosmetology school, I wish in some ways I would have went into a salon for a bit, but I just hadn't worked in months. And there was another Broadway show that came up and after midnight, with Fantasia Barrino. And then we ended up having like Toni Braxton and Patti LaBelle and all these amazing guest stars. And that show came up and my boss offered it to me. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do it because I want to make money fresh out of school. And so I got right back into that Broadway cycle of things and then touring with Tori and then Broadway. And I just kept going on. And it wasn't long before I like hit that wall again. And I just left school feeling so inspired and like ready to take on the world. But then I just fell right back into that like sort of slow lane where I didn't feel inspired anymore. And at the same time, I was like not handling my depression as an artist properly. And I was just partying a lot, like going out every night, drinking a lot. And it just became this cycle of kind of self-destruction where I would go to work, do the job, and then I would go out with my friends who liked to party too. And we would just go out and drink till 4 a.m. And then be hungover at work and then do it all over again. And, you know, it was the same thing when I first moved to New York, waiting tables. Like that's the cycle of a New York server or an LA server is like, you work really hard, you make a bunch of cash, you go out and party because you deserve it. And you just go on and on and on until it becomes like a habit, you know,
an addiction. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just at that place where like, I was just not existing. Like I was just medicating with alcohol to try to mask like how I was feeling. And I'd gone through like a series of bad relationships over the 10 years that I was doing Broadway. And I just didn't feel like anything was right. You know, I felt like I didn't want to, just wanted to numb everything every day. And it was crazy because from the outside looking in, it was like I had everything, you know, and I was doing all these amazing things. But again, like we went and talked about earlier, you just don't know what's going on with someone because, to be honest, no one really asks, you know? We work in a business where we all come to work together. We work long hours together. We spend more time with these people than we do our families, but it's rare that people actually ask how you're doing.
Yeah. And like, it's rare that they want to hear, the real answer. Like if somebody were to like truly, I was thinking about that today before I got on here of like, I would like to ask somebody how they are and have them really tell me. And that's why I like doing this podcast, because we do hear that one, we're not alone. Because even when you were talking earlier and you were saying like how everything looks on the outside, but you know, you're in your house alone with your dogs and you're happy and you're content, but there's still, you know, for me, I'm like, yeah, everything on paper is great. Everything is going super well in my life, but I spend a lot of time alone. And that gets to me, and you miss that companionship that you would experience with somebody, or you're like, I want to go out and do something, but I don't have anybody to do it with. Like a lot of my friends are in different parts of their life where it's like their career's really taking off and they don't have the time, or they are moving in with their boyfriend, or they're married, or they have a baby. And I'm like, I'm single in my friend's apartment. And while I love it so much, and people would think like, Brittany, you've got it all, there's still that thing where you're like, something's missing a little bit here.
Right. And no one wants to take the time to ask, because I don't know that people can take that on themselves. Like they don't actually care. It's just a formality, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something that I deal with in my job, specifically as a hairstylist. Like we take on a lot of energy all day long. And we, in order to make space for that energy, we have to kind of push ourselves to the back so that we can take it on. And a lot of my day is spent navigating other people's energy and
policing
what's
yourself.
going on in their life, and trying to make them feel better about what they're doing. And that, you know, that scene was great. You are a great actor. You know, being that cheerleader for your actors or for your team, or for the producers or whatever it is. So you silence a lot of
having to
yourself.
Do it for yourself at the end of the day. It's exhausting.
And that's why it's like at the end of every week, I am ready to just be alone for 2 days, because I need to recharge. Like I
Mm-hmm.
need to refuel my tank so that I'm ready for another week of taking on other people's energy. And it's a complicated thing that people don't realize. So much of what we do is like, psychotherapy, and
Yeah.
also we're trying to do hair and makeup. And that's where it's like such a exhausting job at times, because you can't show any weakness. You can't show that you're not having a good day. You've got to be
Mm-hmm.
on. You have to be there and be pleasant for the person that you're working for, because there's no time for your problems.
Right.
And people don't realize that. And that's why I always tell people, like, when you go to Starbucks or you go to the grocery store, don't be an asshole.
Right.
Like, sure, your venti, frappuccino, whatever the fuck wasn't made how you wanted it, but who gives a shit? Like, don't be a dick about it.
Right.
Like, everyone's just trying to get by in this
Mm-hmm.
crazy world. Some people work at Starbucks, some people work at the grocery store, whatever it is, you don't know what's going on in their life. And for you just to be rude to someone because you feel impatient or you feel like they need to be doing their job differently, that's not on you to decide. Like, just go get your stuff and pay and move on. Like, it's not worth it. Like, it's not worth ruining someone's day who's already possibly having a terrible day.
Right.
Just because you feel like, sort of making yourself known to this person as the authority in the situation, because it's a transaction and you're the one who's right, because you're the customer. So we never know what people are going through. And it's important to always kind of meet people where they're at every day. Yeah. But it's hard when that dynamic doesn't exist, which in my profession, it doesn't really. Some people are different though. Like, there are a lot of actors that I've worked with, or producers, or just people in the industry that are really open about checking in on people and how they're doing. And they really care about you on a human level, not just on a professional level. So all that being said, I hit a wall on Broadway again, and I was just not in a good place emotionally, physically. Like, everything was just not good. And I kind of just walked away from everything in life. I walked away from Broadway. I quit the show that I was working on, and I stopped drinking, all in this like 3-week period of life around New Year's Eve of, what year is it? 2023. So it would have been 2016. So it was 7 years ago ish.
That's the last time I drank too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I feel like we have so many like similarities in the way like we're feeling and like what we do. And yeah, I felt the same exact way. I was just like, when I was 19, when I was feeling how you were feeling of like, I was working on the strip, making money of like at the Excalibur, like doing some stupid modeling stuff and like making incredible money and like not really utilizing my hair license or anything, and I would do assistant stuff, and then I would work, and then we'd go out drinking because I had a fake ID, and you just do it all over again. And then it was just like, by the time I turned 25, I was like, oh my God, I'm still doing this. Like,
right.
Just soul sucking and like trying to pursue other things and really trying to get on my feet. But then drinking was just like, I had to stop. I knew if I didn't stop, then I was never going to change my life.
And that's good. I mean, I wish more people were aware of, the negative impacts of certain things in their lives. Mm-hmm. But I'm a huge supporter of recovery and just making, and also of people just, living their lives authentically and making mistakes and learning from them. There's never any judgment there, because I think we all go through these moments at different times. But the hard thing for me was that my professional life kept going up and up and up and up and up. And personally, I was just like going down, 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 down. And it was hard to balance that because it felt like everything was good, but it really wasn't. So when I finally like had that come to Jesus moment with myself, where I just was like, you have to take control of your life or you will be a victim of yourself, So I did that and decided like, I'm just going to try TV and film. Like, I'm going to just see what happens. So I had no money in the bank because I quit my job like with no plan. I wasn't thinking because I was like not in a good space. I just knew I needed to like wipe the slate clean and start over. And so I just started reaching out to everyone I knew in the TV world and sending out resumes and emails and texting all of these different people who I knew were working on shows, just saying, I'm available to day play if you need anyone, whatever. And within a few weeks, I started taking on some like additional work and started meeting some people. And then by March of that year, like I was working on my first full-time job with a friend of mine who I'd worked on Broadway with forever. And she asked me to be her key. And it just started from there, and the ball started rolling. And I went from that show, which was Odd Mom Out, which was a Bravo show years ago. It was a scripted comedy that Jill Cargman wrote and starred in about Upper East Side moms who were like rich and out of touch. But it was a great training ground for me to learn the business and to understand like what it takes to pull off a show. And then the jobs just kind of kept coming, and I went from one show to the next, to the next, to the next. And it quickly snowballed into a new career. But the first day that I was in a trailer, like working on actors on my first job, like it just clicked. Like I was like, this is where I'm meant to be. It felt different than when I was working on Broadway. It felt different than when I was working in regional theaters. It felt different than all the work I had done previously. It just felt like, this is my chance to finally design and create. And the thing with TV and movies is that every day is different. You're doing something new every day. The cast is different. The scenes are different. Like there's never anything, although continuity is repetitive just for the sake of making a TV show or movie, it's always different. There's a different mix of people every day. So it's just fresh every day. And like life, like every day we have a new opportunity to start over. And that's what I love about the TV and film industry, is that we really do get to start fresh every day and do something different creatively. And it really is, for me, artistically inspiring, because it just keeps me alive there and doesn't make me feel like, what am I doing?
Right. And I think it's a good reminder, like, especially for me, I know I made the right decision when my soul feels like at peace and like ignited and like on fire. It's like, if you can always be in an experience where that is how you feel, then that's what you chase and that's what you strive for. Because anytime I've ever tried to force anything or make myself really like a job and be like, oh, but the money is great. It's like, yeah, but I feel like shit. So I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. Like, I want to be where I feel like I could be completely myself. And like you said, where it just clicks and it feels good. Like, we should all be so lucky to have that be our job.
Absolutely. And I say that to people on my team or people I work with in the industry all the time, where I see that they're not truly happy, or I see that they're struggling. And I just say, look, if this doesn't make you happy, if this doesn't bring you joy, like, don't do it. Like, it's not worth it. Like, there's a million other jobs in this world that you can pursue or try. But if you don't wake up excited to go to work, and it doesn't bring you some sort of joy, then it's not meant for you. Obviously jobs will always have an element of stress and days that you don't want to be there and you just wish it was over. But even through those hardest days, there are wins for me. Like, I feel proud, like even yesterday on set, like, days are hard, but then you have a moment where it's just like, I did that. Like, yeah. I feel good about that. And I'm proud of myself, and you leave feeling accomplished and you feel fulfilled in some way. And I always feel that way on every job I'm on. And I think, if you're not feeling that in your line of work or with a relationship or with a friendship, you have to step away, because it's just not ever going to get better if you stay in that cycle of sort of just sadness and despair in regards to work or relationships.
Absolutely. And so how did the show Pose change your life?
In so many ways. I mean, it changed me as an artist first and foremost, because it really tasked me with utilizing my entire skill set, from theatrical stuff all the way down to like super hyper realistic stuff. And we covered all of the bases, because when you look at that time period in New York, like, we went from, the AIDS ward in the hospital where everything is just broken down and sad, and we're really portraying this devastating time in our country, to the balls where we're celebrating life and the freedom of expression and family through this magical night in a hall somewhere uptown where everyone is just dressed up and living their life and free. And to kind of have that balance of reality versus fantasy in some ways was, it tasked you with really understanding every step of that journey. And artistically, we got to create such a huge variety of looks on that show and got to collaborate with some amazing people. And every day was just like an opportunity to outdo ourselves again and be like, what can we do now? Like, let's dream bigger, think bigger, let's create bigger, let's do more, because it was such a inspired project when it came down to the design. And I had never worked on a huge TV show like that. So when I got the call about it, it was from this guy, Chris Clark, who's a hair department head. He worked on so many Ryan Murphy shows before that. He did like Feud, Versace, someone I always looked up to because he had won many Emmys for his work. And it was all very heavily designed work that was like just super inspiring to see. And so he asked me to be his key, like his assistant department head. And I was terrified. I was like, I'm going to be terrible in this position. But I was so excited by the premise of the series, because it was something that I had studied and I had watched all of the documentaries. I had books like prior to that.
On
like,
Ballroom.
Just that time in New York City, like from the 70s through the late 80s. Like, I always wish that I had been born 10 years earlier, because just to be alive in New York during that time, I think would have been amazing. So to get to sort of live vicariously through the show and pretend I was alive at that time was super exciting. And Chris was there as my boss for the first like 5 episodes. And then he had to go on to do another project. And then I took over as the department head and then stayed for the rest of the series. And it was huge for me because it was the first time I had had a responsibility on my shoulders of that size, because I felt like working for Ryan Murphy Productions, like that there was a huge responsibility to do a great job, because his work always has inspired me, from way back to his first shows on television. Like Nip Tuck was a show that I grew up watching, and it was just so inspiring to me in so many ways, because I got to see a huge array of different individuals portrayed on that show. And just to see like the design that went into the show and how they created these worlds visually, although it was a show about plastic surgery, it was super dysfunctional, and it had addiction, and it had sex, and it had just all people of all different gender identities. Like, it was a very eye-opening show. And I always watched his shows thinking, God, it would be so amazing to work on a project with him someday. Never thinking that it would be a reality,
Yeah. And
then to be in a room with him and to see his mind at work and to see how he tells stories and creates these worlds, it's still inspiring to me. Like, I thank him for a lot of my journey in this business, because he kind of has shown me that you're never too old to dream and create, like that anything is possible. And because of him, so many stories have been told, like Pose, where these unheard voices have been amplified for the first time, and people have been able to see a different group of people portrayed, or to see a different side of a story that maybe they didn't previously understand. And with Pose, that was, I think the biggest reward of that show was to see how it transformed people, to see how it changed people like my parents, who, they've never met a trans person in their life. They've never been around someone who is non-binary or any sort of different gender identity than what they see as normal,
Right.
So to see them, because of my involvement in the show, watch the show and to understand it. And even when I was back home, there was a conversation happening at the high school about a transgender student, and my parents, just to hear them talk about it in a supportive way, and to say, like, to be on the side of the trans student instead of on the side of the conservative parents. Because in this situation, it was about a student who was trans that was in a locker room, and there was a parent that got upset and all this stuff. And it was a big news story, got blown out of proportion because it wasn't anything like what they portrayed it as. And to see my parents defending this student in conversation was crazy to me. But I was also like, people really can change. Like, we really do have the power to impact people with art, with television, with movies. We do hold that power, and it's extremely important to keep making shows like this. And that's, the power of Pose, is that it did shed light on a group of people that had previously been ignored and not heard from and treated like outcasts. And still, obviously, it's a huge problem, and it's still continuing on in terrible, terrible ways in this country with all of the legislation that's happening. But because Pose is out there, and because so many more, there need to be a lot more, but so many more trans actors are on TV now and in the media and doing things that they should be doing. We're starting to slowly see, I think, the culture shift a bit. And even in these small towns in America, people are looking at things differently and thinking, that's not what I thought it was. They're just human beings. It's cool.
Yeah. And I love that, that's a really great example for people to hear, is that you're somebody who followed your dreams and stayed true to who you are and got on a show that's amplifying trans voices. And because of that, your parents were then able to see things in a different way. And it was a positive outcome. And I think more people need to hear stories like that, of that, especially people in the queer community, there are people who will change their mind. And when they do, they can be on your side. We can all have these conversations, and we're all human. It's hard because sometimes you feel hopeless and sometimes you feel hopeful. And I think that story that you just said of your parents being on that trans kid side is such a hopeful thing. So it's and it's a testament to who you are and how much they love you.
It is. And that's, the beauty in getting older and interacting with your parents and seeing, them get older. And it's been really rewarding, especially spending time with my parents a few weeks ago, just how proud they were of me and where I've gone in life and who I am. And, it's a very different conversation than we had 25 years ago. But to see that just like I've evolved, they have evolved. And it's such a beautiful testament to the human race, and how if we really do focus on what's best for us as human beings in this world and just try to take care of one another instead of just focusing on I need, I want, I, me, we can help each other and be a little bit more caring and respectful towards people that come into our lives, instead of it's just a different world too, because we're all so attached to our phones and technology that we don't even take the time to speak to people when we interact with them in public or walking down the street, because we just have such blinders on to staying, focused on what we think is important at that time.
Right.
The other thing that posed the biggest thing, I think, for me as a person was just, it really made me understand my place in this world as a white man and my impact on the people around me, and the privilege that comes with being a white person in this country. And, first of all, as a white person, I don't think I ever should have been working on the show. I think it should have been all people of color, but that's just not how it was staffed from the beginning. And, I wasn't in charge in the beginning. And, they, in their defense, they hired the best team that they wanted to put together. And that's just happened to be a lot of white people. But I learned very quickly that in that space, especially with Black trans women, that there needed to be people who actually had a lived experience and a shared experience, but also people who weren't necessarily trans, but people who were Black, brown, and representative of the people in the story, all of the characters in the story, so that there was accurate storytelling going on, and that there was a real foundational knowledge of what was going on in that time, and a connection to the hairstyles and the culture and the history. And as a white person, like I didn't live that and I didn't experience that. And I also wasn't alive during that time in New York. So finding people who were either part of that culture at the time or were part of the culture now, and hiring a team that looked more like our cast and was more representative was something that, like, when I started season 2, that was a huge undertaking, but it's something that was very important to me to make sure that we had a crew from everyone in the trailer all the way down to all the background hairstylists that represented our cast and the story that we were telling. So that was the huge shift that we made season 2. But it was also just a huge shift for me in the industry, because it made me realize that if I'm going to continue to be in a position of power, I'm already a white man in this world, and I carry a lot more privilege than anyone else who exists, even though I'm queer. I can still live life with more privilege than the person next to me, than a woman who's white, than a black woman, a black man, whoever it may be. I'm part of that group of white men that, get away with everything. And knowledge is power, and power can turn into action. And if I were to continue on using my privilege to benefit only myself, I feel like I would be wasting that. And so I made a promise to myself way back then that I was going to move forward in this industry differently, and that I was going to use the power that I have in these rooms to amplify the voices of the people around me in my life who didn't have access the same way that I did. And that I was going to create opportunity for Black and brown artists. And I was going to work with organizations to help change the industry so that we could have more Black and brown artists in the trailers, and that we did have a more diverse group of people working on shows, so that we didn't continue to have the problem that we have in Hollywood, where you walk into all white trailers as a Black woman or a Black man, and you have no one to do your hair or your makeup. And long story short, that was the biggest takeaway that I had, that I was not aware of before I worked on Pose. I was not aware of how much my impact had on other people in a negative way, oftentimes, And I got so close with so many of the women, India Moore and Michaela J. Rodriguez and Dominique and Angelica, and each of these women, Haley, they all taught me something different.
Yeah.
And we all had honest conversations where we really had a thorough discussion of, like, how I impact them, things I've said, or things, it was a very open book. And I was there to listen and learn, because I realized that I'm never going to have an opportunity like this again. And I wanted to make sure that I walked away from it the best way that I could, with the most information I have, and to be open to learning as much about myself in this space as I could, and how to change it moving forward, so that I could be productive in this industry and not another part of the problem.
That was so beautifully said. It's very admirable and inspiring, and I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I mean, that's so, you're just incredibly eloquent when you speak also. I'm like, I don't think I sound like that, but I mean, it's so true. And I really do think that, like, when you surround yourself with people who are different than you can learn a lot, and it's a really beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be scary.
Not at all. And I think that fear is what keeps people from working with new people or trying new things, because they're scared of not knowing what the outcome is going to be. And that's something I've always thrived off of, is the unknown. Like the idea of, like, can I really pull off this job? I don't know. Like, maybe not. I might fail miserably. And I think that a lot when I take jobs on, because I just think, this is huge. I don't know if I can pull this off. But that feeling of the unknown, and is it possible or is it not possible? It drives me to be better. And I think that same thing can be applied to interactions with human beings and friendships, relationships, all of these things. Like, if you just lean into fear a little bit, like, why are you feeling that fear? Like, try to acknowledge it and address it. And being a sober person, like, that's the biggest gift of not drinking, is to feel all of my feelings clearly and to be forced to deal with them.
Yeah.
And to truly understand, like, why are you crying right now? Like, what about this song that you're listening to? Or what about this TV show? Why are you feeling this way? instead of just brushing it aside, like, oh, it's such a sad movie. I'm like, well, no, you're crying for a reason, not just because you're empathizing with that character. You're crying because it touches a part of you that needs to be heard right now. And
Yes.
there's something inside of you that needs to let something out. And that just made me think of this crazy movie. It's animated, Inside Out, I think it's called.
Yeah. Okay.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, we had to. So I'm very open on here. I was in outpatient therapy for a while because my mental health just got so awful. And we would have once a week, we'd have movie days and we'd watch Inside Out. And it wasn't until like I was in this like group therapy setting watching it with a bunch of adults that I was like, oh my God, now I get this movie. Like when I was younger and saw it, I was just like, oh, they're annoying. All these feelings are annoying. Like this movie's annoying. And now I'm like, oh my God.
It's funny because I had never seen it. And a friend of mine, Chris, was telling me about it. We were working out like a month ago and he was like, have you seen this movie? And I'm like, because we were talking about feelings and just all kinds of things. And he's like, have you seen this movie? And I'm like, no. And so I looked it up and I started watching it. And I have in my phone like a 6-page dissertation on, I like to do that with movies now or TV shows.
I love that.
I go into my notes app and I start journaling about it immediately so that I can recognize. It's like, I guess always a student, but when I was younger with books, like textbooks and things, I'd always write in the margins, like all of this extra stuff that would come up in my mind to go back to, or just to think about. And when I watched that movie, it just was like light bulbs for me going off left and right, because it made me look at like the inside of our brain and body differently than I have before. And it's so amazing what a movie geared towards kids how that can have such a strong impact on you as an adult,
Right. And it's very like, like you said, being a sober person, you have to feel all your feelings and you can't push them away. So you do more investigating of getting to the root of like, why is this making me upset? And like, am I really upset about this? Or is it everything that this one thing represents in my past? And like, am I bringing all that trauma to this very moment that probably has nothing to do with any of this? Like there's so many things, but then it grounds you so much more in reality. And I think it has like being able to investigate those triggers and combat the negative thoughts in real time has made all of my relationships so much stronger and my relationship with myself so much stronger. Like I know I have my back now where I didn't before.
And isn't that a beautiful thing?
It's amazing
to finally start to embrace that and understand it. And I got out of a relationship last year, but we had been living together for a long time afterwards because LA and, it's expensive.
Yeah.
But I started living on my own like 2 months ago, and we're still friends, my ex and I, and, we share dogs and all of these things, but I live alone for the first time in a very long time.
Me too.
And it's been so amazing to just really dive into how I'm feeling and to process this breakup and this transition in my life as a sober person, because in the past, I would walk away from every relationship destructively. Like I'd be like, burn it to the ground. This is over. I hate you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go on a bender, go party with my friends. And then, think about this like a month from now or a year from now or never. And to actually go through this as a like sane, sober person where I'm processing this stuff, it's painful at times because you have to really deal with it and it's heavy. But it's also something that's opened my eyes to how I want to move forward in my life differently in the next relationship, and identify patterns and identify behavior that I tend to like exhibit when I meet new people or new men, especially. And so I recently had a thing where I was like interacting with this guy as friends, but we were spending a lot of time together, and it became like a very much an emotional affair in a way. And I fell deep into it. Nothing ever happened. It wasn't like it was a physical thing or anything like that. but it was emotionally very heavy, and we were spending a lot of time together, and we were talking about a lot of deep stuff and feelings, and we were both going through a transition of relationships. And so it felt to me like we were connected. Mm-hmm. And it was hard for me because what I wanted to do was romanticize the whole thing and to make it into something that I wasn't fair for me to decide. Like, it wasn't fair to me to define his intentions before he defined them to me himself. But I still thought about all of it. But the difference was that I processed it, I journaled about it without ever telling this person how I was really feeling, because I didn't think it was fair to them to drop that on them, because I didn't know if they reciprocated. But I also knew that it wasn't, that time needed to pass. Like, I wasn't in a space where this was what I needed to be doing right now. So I let the feelings go through me, and they're still there. Like, there's still remnants of them, because I care about this person, but they're not, I understand their place and why they're happening, you know, right. But I now know the difference between feeling them and acknowledging them and acting on them, and how it can be dangerous sometimes to act on feelings, especially if they're possibly lustful or if they are new, because we can kind of assign romantic qualities to something in life without fully understanding if that's what it is. Yeah. But in the past, I just would word vomit on every guy I would meet and be like, "You're amazing. Let's get married," you know, because I didn't know how to filter myself. And I was so desperate to like be accepted by a man, that I would do anything to make them happy. And in the process, you know, you sacrifice yourself just to have a relationship. But then you get into the relationship and you think, I'm not even here. Like, where am I in this relationship? Yeah. Yeah. And it's so, and you know, once you become aware of those things, like you said, knowledge is so powerful. Once you become aware that you're doing those things, you can't actively choose to make those same decisions again, because you know where it will put you. And you're like, I can't do this to myself again. I can't betray myself again. I've done it before and I won't ever do it again. Which leads me to one of the shows you had said that was like a really prominent show in your life was Sex and the City. And so in those girls, and like, even when you were saying you were talking with the cast of Pose and we're talking about like speaking with females, I noticed with Sex and the City, and last night I watched Steel Magnolia for the first time. They're all for the first time. I know. I'm surprised. My eyes are swollen today, but like, that is the go-to cry movie for me always. Yeah. And so I was noticing like a few of the shows that you have chose are like a lot of, and that you've been a part of, are really strong, empowering women who all really take care of each other. And on the tail end of speaking of relationships and everything, who in Sex and the City do you identify with the most? I think realistically, you know, back in the day, like everyone wanted to be a Samantha, you know, but I think, or a Carrie or whatever, but I think I have aspects of Miranda and Carrie more prominently than anyone else, you know, just Miranda. That, like, I would say Charlotte before Miranda for you after what Miranda, you've been talking about. Well, just because she's so, like, in my work life, I am very OCD, detail oriented, like crazy about getting it right. And anyone that works with me knows, like, I'm just so business when I'm at work. But inside my head, I'm like that, like hopeless romantic, like Carrie, like always like writing about things that I want to have happen in my life, and, you know, dreaming of all the possibilities of my future, and, you know, possibly romanticizing things so that I think something is more than it is. All of those things. But I think that beauty of that show is that everyone could identify with a little bit of each of those women and the struggle that they had. And that's any good TV show. I think when you have well-rounded characters like those women or the women of Pose, like there's a something for everyone, but it also makes you see parts of yourself that you maybe didn't look at before, because you do identify with everyone's story in some way. Like we all do, like we all have shared experiences, whether we know it or not. Right. But that show was a show that came out when I was living in Chicago, and, you know, we didn't have cable. So it was an event. It was Sunday nights at this bar called Spin on Halsted. and they would show Sex and the City and then Queer as Folk back to back. And it was like group viewing, you know, they had drink specials and we would all go and we'd sit there for 2 hours and get pictures of whatever the cheap drink they had were. Yeah. And then we would just sit there and watch these shows and we would laugh and we would cry. And it was a community experience where we were bonding as queer people in this space watching these shows. And, you know, Sex and the City and Queer as Folk were interesting shows because they both followed, you know, this group of like young people who were trying to figure out who they were and what their lives were. And I think they paralleled each other in a lot of ways just because of the experiences that were happening. But it was always such an event. And I looked forward to that Sunday night. Yeah. Like crazy, because it was just, you know, those were characters that were aspirational in some ways, like living their authentic lives. And living in Chicago at the time, I hadn't moved to New York yet. I had been to New York one time in high school. And that was the first time that I saw queer people existing in public, happy and like holding hands. And I broke up with my girlfriend like right after that trip. She was there with me. And it finally clicked for me, like that this was a possibility that I could be a happy queer person and not miserable for the rest of my life, you know? And those shows like Sex and the City, Queer as Folk, like they further solidified that in my brain that like anything is possible if you're true to yourself and you kind of just follow your heart in life.
Yeah, I love that. And I am watching Pose for the first time too. I watched Legendary on HBO Max and I was like obsessed with Naomi. Like she's everything in the world. Amazing. To me. When she screams, when people do a good job, when she like really loves something and she just like covers her mouth and screams, it is my favorite thing in the world. And yeah, watching Pose, like women and just watching humans in general go through something incredibly hard and stick up for themselves is something that I love, like being reflected on screen, and like women really stepping into their power. And with Sex and the City, I think watching that, I was happy I never watched it until I was 30. And I really felt like I connected more to those characters. And like, I saw the things that they were doing in relationships and I was like, oh God, like when you see it on screen, you're like, oh, I've been there and I've done that. And now I know how stupid I looked. Like, I'll never do that again.
Right. It's wild when you see that stuff played out that you have a connection with, or you've done the same thing. Cause you're like, oh my God, how crazy was I?
But yeah, watching Still Magnolias for the first time last night, the one thing I watched is like, well, one, Julia Roberts is like so incredibly beautiful. It's like painful, like how stunning she is. Like you just look at her and you're like, how is this real? And Shirley MacLaine is like in that movie as Weezer was so funny. And Sally Fields, I mean, all of them, it was like, but the one thing that I really took away from it is like how incredible female bonds are and like how important it is to have those women in your life who just know what you need even when you don't know what you need. And that's how they all kind of were to each other. And the scene where, you know, she's crying at the funeral and then she's like, hit her. I'm like in the middle of bawling hysterically and then laughing my ass off. And those are like the types of movies and TV shows that I love so much because it really gets your guard down when you're in those kind of vulnerable moments watching these shows. And you're like, wow, I didn't realize that one, I needed that cry. And two, I needed that laugh so bad. And when it comes in at the perfect time, it's like, oh, it's the biggest, like it's therapy. It's a release.
It is. And that's why that scene specifically in that film always will stand out to me as the perfect scene to just fully release, because you do have this like gut-wrenching, shaking, like uncontrollable cry because, and if you don't, then, you know, you've shit to work on. Because it's hard not to, because it's like such an emotional scene. And then it's followed up, like you said, with just the most amazing laugh that you can't control either. And it's like such a healing moment to watch on TV because you really do feel connected. And that's such a powerful thing to be able to pull off on camera, I think, when you have writing like that and you have actors who can really take you there.
Yeah. Was there ever a time you were on set and you were watching a performance and you were like blown away by what was happening in front of you?
Constantly. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, I've been really fortunate to work with some amazing actors. And those are the moments I love on set, when you think you've seen it all, and then you just watch a moment of brilliance taking place, and it's so quiet. And I always have such admiration for actors who are able to go to that place in a room filled with hundreds of people staring at them, surrounded by things, in a different way than live theater. You have people who are just not focused the same way you are, because once, we do our last looks, then we go sit back and we're watching the monitor. And then, everyone on set is doing their job, whether it's the grips or the camera operators or whoever it is, they're thinking about something else. Right. They're not connected to the piece the same way as the actor is. And the ability that they have to go to this vulnerable place in front of such a large group of people in a public space is crazy to me, because it is so quiet, those moments, and it's so small, the acting that they do, that it's just really amazing to see it play out. And that's such a gift of the industry, to be behind the scenes and to watch some of these actors work, because it is incredible. In the same way I watch the camera guys work, some of these steady cam operators, when they do these camera moves that are insane, or the costume department, when I see some of the things that the costume designer is creating and building, it's an amazing to see such a group of creative people firing on all cylinders and coming together to tell a story, And I think that's why when shows come out and we get back to like critics and people being negative about a show or what they think, and sharing that online, none of that really matters when you've worked on the show, because what went into it, and how authentic and honest the experience was and the work that went into it. And so for me, at least, I'm like, you didn't like it, whatever. I loved it. And I had a great experience working on it.
Yeah. Well, even we talked about how there was some negative, feedback from Pam and Tommy. Let me tell you, Pam and Tommy was one of my favorite shows that I'd ever seen. It was, that show for me came into it came out and I watched it, and I was feeling so uninspired by so much, and acting was getting stale for me. And I watched their performances in that, and I was like, holy shit, this is what it means to be fearless and committed and grounded and real. And I became obsessed with Sebastian Stan after this. And I also you did this iconic hairstyle again, that got a brand new life of its own. Now there's women wearing their hair like this all over again because of something you recreated. So I think that's also a really amazing thing.
Yeah. And it's wild because, if you're being selfish and thinking about you're only me, it's easy to be like, well, why isn't anyone giving me credit for that?
Well, no, I mean, credit to you. Yeah.
It was crazy because it went nuts on TikTok. Yeah. And all these young kids were recreating Pam Anderson hairstyles, and kids who didn't even know who she was before the show came out. And they didn't know what an impact she had on the trends in fashion during the 90s and how iconic she was, Yeah. And now there's all these young people who are discovering her for the first time and recreating these hairstyles that, are timeless. She has that, it throws all the way back to Brigitte Bardot, very much inspired by those looks. And when you see these young kids doing it, and then you see all these celebrity hairstylists doing everyone from Kim Kardashian down with the same Pam Anderson updo that we did on the show. I just think,
that's a big testament
have such
to you.
An impact on the world. But people don't necessarily recognize it like that because it's TV and we're often the unseen people behind the scenes. But in the world of fashion and celebrity hairstylists and makeup artists, their work becomes trends and they get credit for it because they're in the public eye. Whereas we're kind of behind the scene creatives that aren't. That's why Pam and Tommy was so cool, because we had such an amazing response from the press, and we did so
Mm-hmm.
many interviews, like with every outlet. And so we really got to showcase our work in a way that I'd never have been able to in the past. And that was a huge testament to the power of the show, but also the power of the work that we did.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it so much. And that's the time where I wish I was, in my 20s and 30s, is like the early 90s, and just living that kind of life of like going out and not having a phone and just like being like, oh, I'll check my messages when I'm back and nobody knows where I am. I'm out having the time of my life. But like that just seemed like so much more fun than today. Like being in your 30s today kind of sucks. Not sucks. I'm not going to say that, but it's like because I don't drink and because I don't like being up past 10 o'clock at night, I feel like, what do I do? Like I have the rest of the day off. What do I do? And like, what? I don't know. It's a weird thing and everything feels like people just want to do things to like show it off on social media. And I'm like, oh God. Well,
that's why I have found the joy of vibing, just existing in my own home. And like nowadays, like I don't turn the TV on generally until like after dinner, and I'm like ready to like chill for the night. I don't do a lot of like daytime sitting on the couch. If I have a day off, like I'm not going to be watching TV. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be like gardening, in the pool, in the sun, like going to the gym. Like I like to be active during the day, but if I am at home doing projects, I put on just like some really fun dancing music, and I just vibe at home doing what I do with my dogs, and we just have so much fun. And I don't care about anything. Like I don't care about what everyone else is doing in the world, like whether there's an event going on or some great party or whatever, because I just don't care. Like I did all that. Like I feel like I gave so much of myself to the world in my younger years through going out. Like when I was younger, and part of this connects back to just not feeling your feelings and identifying like what's upsetting you, is that you are just seeking an escape constantly. Like you're seeking an escape from yourself. So that could be binge watching TV all day long. That could be, going out and partying till 4 a.m. or more. Whatever it is, I was always seeking an escape every night. Like I didn't want to go home and sit with myself. And so when I tell people now that I spend a lot of time alone, some people are blown away. They're just like, I don't know what I would do by myself. Like, what do you mean? Like, there's so much to do. Like, you don't have to have social interaction constantly. And again, like I said earlier, like I'm drained by Saturday morning from taking on energy all week, that I need at least 8 hours alone to reset and make sure that I'm present for whoever comes into my life. Because if I'm going to make plans with someone to go to lunch, I want to make sure that I'm present for them and not showing up just to talk about myself and about the week that I've had, because that's not fair to them as a friend, because they might care somewhat, but they also want to connect with you as a person,
I love that. And I feel that. I feel the exact same. And like, let me be clear. I don't want to go out and like party. But I love like this. I feel like this is like, we're not on our phones. We're looking at each other in the eye and we're having a real, honest, vulnerable, beautiful conversation about things that we think are important and that can help each other. And I'm like, that's what I want when I leave the house. And it's so rare to find that. And that's why I think I love doing this podcast. But like also the other night, I have a Bluetooth microphone and I just did karaoke in my house all night by myself. And it was so fun. My neighbors probably.
Which is amazing. I did that recently too. I like used an app that I had downloaded years ago. I think it was called Smule or something.
Yeah.
You can like do karaoke on your phone and put all these voice effects.
Yeah.
And I was just like, let's see how I sound years later after not singing forever. And you just like, it was so fun, but it sounded terrible when I played it back, but it was still like things that like get me out of my body and just help me to just be free are things that I'm trying to find these days, especially with myself. Like if I can start with myself and be free, then when I interact with other people, I'm going to be more free every time. And that's why I really do invest a lot of time in like the people that I hire and work with, because we're truly together all day long, and we all know it's a job and that we're going to be there, but we also know that we care about each other and what's going on in each other's lives, and we look out for each other. So when we're at work, we're not talking about work. We're talking about everything, but, you know, we're talking about relationships and what's going on in each other's lives, and making sure that everyone feels supported and safe in the room, so that when we are working, you know, everyone feels like they're seen and not just there as a cog in the wheel and no one cares about them, you know, because that's the worst feeling in the world, when you go to work and you just feel invisible. And so much of what we do has to be invisible because it's not about us. So I think it's important to surround yourself with people who do see you, so that you don't disappear all the time.
And I love that because, like, look, there are I've worked in salons where the girls can be so catty and you're like, I don't want to do this job. Like, this is not what I signed up for. But the salon I'm at now, I left there and went to a different job, like not in the salon industry, and then came back because I was like, I miss my family. Like, that salon, there's only like 6 or 7 of us there, and we are a family. And I spend almost every day there. Even on my days off, I'm somehow there, like stopping by, saying hi. Like, we all live around the corner from each other. My boss is like a second mother to me now. And like, we met on set almost 12 years ago. And so I love that you create that environment for the people who are working for you, because it is so important to go somewhere and feel valued and feel like people are going to lift you up. And if you're having a bad day, you can be honest about it and people can treat you a little more gentler. How do you say it? More gently. I'm not as eloquent as you. But
yes,
like,
you are.
You can, like, you know, be honest with people. And like, I think that that's so important to have in a work environment. There's 2 more questions I want to ask before you have to go.
Yeah.
One, when you are deciding, okay, I'm done with my day, I've gotten outside of my body, what's the show you're turning on at night to wind down?
It depends on like what kind of night it is, but generally speaking, I'm just going to be awake for like moments before I fade away because I'm so tired. But my go-to has always been The Office. Like, it's just something that I have a few shows that I cycle through every year. I watched the entire 30 Rock series every year, at least once. And I recently worked with Matt Hubbard, who's a writer who wrote on 30 Rock, on this show that I just finished called Loot with Maya Rudolph.
I loved Loot so much. Oh my God.
So we just almost finished season 2, and then we got shut down from the writer's strike. We only had a few days left, but we'll pick it up later. But working with him on this show, I told him that recently, that I watch 30 Rock once a year. He's like, what episode? I'm like, no, like the whole series. Because it's one of those shows, although some of it hasn't aged well, because some of it is very like, same with The Office. Some of The Office has not aged well, and would not be on TV how it is today. But both of those shows, there's some sort of safety that I feel with them. Years ago, there's always been a go to sleep show for me. When I was younger, it was Will and Grace. Then it was Golden Girls for a while. But like the last 5 years, it's been like The Office or 30 Rock. And it's because I know every episode inside and out. And I don't know, it just feels, there's a comfort to it that I can fall asleep hearing these voices, knowing that they're people I know and that I trust, and I know their story. And there's just so many elements of The Office that make me laugh out loud still today, because it's just the humor in it really speaks to me. Same with 30 Rock, because it is somewhat offensive at times. But it's really just these people that aren't aware of themselves fully. Just existing in these jobs that, you know, are not what they maybe dreamed of doing, and seeing how their relationships play out. But there's also with The Office, this incredibly like romantic storyline with Jim and Pam that has always spoken to the hopeless romantic in me, because you see these two people like who from the very beginning love each other so much, and how long it takes them to actually get there. And when they finally do get together, like, it's just such a beautiful thing. Like I still find it so beautiful when I see them kind of come together.
Yeah.
Even though I've seen it a million times.
Oh, it doesn't matter. Every time Monica proposes to Chandler, I cry my eyes out every time.
Yeah. And that's the
am.
thing. Like, I think that's the thing with TV shows or movies, is that we feel a connection to these characters that help us feel a little bit more safe, a little bit more relaxed and comfortable when we're maybe not feeling that way at the end of our day.
Yeah. When you fall asleep, do you put your TV on a timer or do you let it play throughout the entire night? Like, is The Office just running all night?
No, I will put it on a timer.
See, I'm a psychopath and I don't. I wake up and it's like,
I don't always though. But that's the thing is like, I don't know why from a very young age, we always had TVs in our bedroom growing up. I think it was just my parents' way of handling 3 kids and getting them to like,
it was your babysitter. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would always fall asleep watching TV when I was younger and wake up watching every morning before school. I would get ready really quick before my mom so that I could go lay on the couch and like kind of half nap, half watch Gilligan's Island reruns that were on every morning.
Yeah.
Before we had to leave for school. So I would go like shower, get all my stuff together. And then while she was getting ready, I knew I had a solid 45 minutes to like watch Gilligan's Island and just chill before I had to go to school. And I loved that ritual. Like I loved that show. And it was just what got me through each day. It was like my little fun time in the morning.
See, I never had a TV in my room growing up. So I think that's why as an adult, I became so like, it is so amazing I'm like, wow, I'm laying in my bed watching TV. Who would have thought? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like, it's like so abnormal to me. And I remember being younger and like sleeping over at friends' houses. And when the first VHS of Titanic would wear out and we'd all fall asleep. And then it was just like a blue screen you wake up to in the middle of the night. And you're like, someone has to change the VHS. Like, this is such a pain.
Yeah.
Barry, I adore you. This has been so amazing. Like I said, you are so incredibly well-spoken and intentional with your word and very, like, I've learned so much from you just in this short window of time. I feel like it's flown by. Before you leave, I want to ask you, what is either the greatest piece of mental health advice you've ever given, or what's the best mental health advice you have to give to others?
We talked about it a bit earlier, but that ideology of stay in your own lane, like focus on your own journey without neglecting those around you. Try not to invest in the comparison game in life and try to focus on what you're here to do on this earth, because everyone's journey in this world is different. And although I might aspire to be like someone else, or I admire someone's career path, it's never going to be mine because I'm not them. My career path or my relationship or my financial situation is going to be what I make it. And I have the power to do that. And as individuals, we all have that power to make our life great as it can be for us, if we are able to shut out the noise and just listen to what we need and listen to what our heart's saying and what our mind is saying, and to acknowledge it when it raises its hand and says like, hey, I've got something to tell you. And the older I get, the more that I listen to that feeling, that like gut feeling of like lately I've been having this feeling for like a year or so that there's a huge shift coming in my life, like that I'm going to move in a different direction. And I don't know what that is, but I have acknowledged that feeling and I've said hello and I've said, I'm open to this. Like, when you're ready, tell me where we're going and I'll go with you, Barry. And I will follow you along, because every time that I do that in life, it takes me to the right place eventually. You know, sometimes acknowledging that shift is painful for a bit, but sometimes it's not, you know. But I think ultimately when you listen to your heart and you acknowledge the feelings that you're having and you put them into action, that you end up in the place that you're supposed to be and that the universe is intentionally guiding you there. But the moment that we get lost in what everyone else is doing and what our friends are doing or what our coworkers are doing, or colleagues, or those people we look up to, and comparing our journey to theirs, is when we start getting into that sort of self-doubt game where we really cut ourselves down because we're not doing it fast enough. We don't have enough money yet. Why don't we own a home yet? Why don't we have this? Why don't we have a magazine cover? Whatever it is, like when we get into that headspace where we're not accepting our journey, you can kind of get lost, and it's harder to find your way when you're not focused on what's in front of you.
Right. Right. And also having gratitude for where you're at is super important. Also recognizing and being proud of yourself for everything you have done instead of focusing on what you haven't done yet.
And that's the balance that's hard to find in the entertainment industry, because everyone is doing something constantly, something different. There's always new projects being made. There's always new photo shoots being done. And it's easy to feel like you're not enough in this space, because there's always going to be someone who is doing something better, or what the world perceives as better, you know, or what you may perceive as better. But you do have to celebrate the small wins. And I say that to people all the time about what is a win for you today? You know, like, I know that you're overwhelmed and you feel like you're not going anywhere with your career, but let's look at today. Let's look at what did we do today that you could recognize as a win? You know, is it just showing up to work? Is that your win? Then that's great. You made it to work, you know? If it's overcoming a boundary or a barrier that was holding you up with something creatively, and you are able to kind of have a breakthrough, that's a win too. Or is it just meeting a new person, saying hello to a stranger? Like, all of these things can be wins, but we often don't look at them as wins because we've been conditioned to think that success is the only win in life. That, you know, if you're not succeeding at something or the best at something, then you're not winning in life. But not everyone is on that path. You know, not everyone's going to win an award. Not everyone's going to have their work acknowledged in a magazine or on a TV show. Like, there are normal people in this world that accomplish a huge amount of amazing things just by raising their children and making good human beings, and putting them into the world with the tools they need to have their own successful life. Like, that is a huge success in itself. Good parenting. Like, there's so many different versions of what it is to succeed in life, and not all of them look like what we see on Instagram or on Facebook. Like, everyone's win is going to be different. And if we can just acknowledge those and focus on our own little circle in this world and kind of what's happening in our realm, then I think the faster you're able to get to being a whole person that understands themselves and loves themselves.
Well, this was my big win for the day, is interviewing you. And I truly, I can't thank you enough. I mean, this was an incredible conversation. I'm so thankful that you took the time out to, and first of all, like, even when you emailed me back your shows and everything, it was so thoughtful. And I just love your thoughtfulness and how kind you are, and how, I mean, I can like, I feel like this whole interview, I've just been like sucked into your eyes of like listening to, hanging on every single word you say. Like, I think you're just absolutely incredible. So again, this is my big win today. So thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it. This was a really cool interview to do. And I'm sorry it took us so long to get here, but we got here.
It's totally fine. It didn't take us that long at all. And also,
I also wanted to make sure that I did a good job. And I'm like, I want to make sure I have the right things to talk about.
No, you did. Look, every time before I get on here, I literally texted Jake. I was like, I am so nervous right now. And they were like, it's good to be nervous. Tell Barry I said hi.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
It is good to be nervous always. You know, that's the thing. It's like, when I spoke in front of those high school kids, I was so nervous, but that I had to write a speech out, because I was like, if I don't write this down, I'm going to get lost in emotions and past triggers and just lose my way, you know?
Yeah. It's like you have to do,
and high school kids are unpredictable, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, gosh, everything's unpredictable though. It's like, you know, I go into this and I have my set of questions, and then each guest brings something completely new. I never know where it's going to go. And I'm like, I feel like I'm like, did I even navigate this well? Because 2 hours have gone by and I'm like, did we talk about this? Did we talk about this? But you get so in the moment, and then you're like, you know what, whatever came of it is what needed to come of it. And it will.
Right. Yeah.
And like now
that's what I love about podcasts too, is like, listening to any podcast where two people are just talking, you sometimes think like, what are they going to talk about for an hour and a half? But just when you hear, to me at least, I'm very fascinated when two people are just speaking, because I feel like I listen to the Trixie and Katya podcast a lot, and you know, they have known each other for so long, and you think, what are these two going to talk about anymore? Because they're always together. Like, what do they have to talk about? But they just go down this rabbit hole and they're very honest about their past traumas and mistakes and all of these things. And through their conversation, they shed light on all of these different topics. And it's always a wild ride to listen to them. But I feel like I walk away with more information about something, you know, and I laugh and all of those things. But it's just fun when you get two people in a room and they can actually just discuss things.
Yeah. You know? And like two people who don't know each other. I mean, I've met you once prior, but it was like, you know, you're probably the second person I've interviewed that I don't know in real life and like have a long-standing friendship with. But I feel like I connected with you more than a lot of people because we had so much in common, and like a lot of things in your story also rang true for me. And so it was really beautiful to see how that all unfolded. But
I think it speaks to like the concept that you have for this podcast and how you're navigating a conversation about mental health and through TV or movies. And I think it's interesting because everyone has a shared experience when it comes to viewing something and emotions that come up or how it's impacted them in their lives. And I mean, if anyone's listening to this that wants to take something away, I say like, do the exercise that I do with watching movies and TV where I will pause it, open my notes app, and I'll put the title of the film or whatever it is that I'm watching in. And if something comes up in me while I'm watching it, I address it, whether it's something someone says and I want to just kind of riff on that a little bit and how it makes me feel, or like, I never thought about this like that. And just to journal for a few minutes. It might take you 4 hours to watch a movie because you're stopping every few minutes to write. But I feel like when I go back and I read what I've written after watching a really important movie or TV show, I learned so much about myself. And it's this kind of sort of free therapy where I'm really getting in touch with my mind and my heart about what's going on when I watch these shows, you know?
I love that so much. I think that's so incredible. And you know, when I watched Steel Magnolias last night, I did the same thing because I heard like it was Christmas time and it was like a song that came on in the movie. And this song, I swear to God, transported me back to being in the backseat of my parents' car, leaving Sunday Mass, the smell of the heat coming out of the car, my mom's perfume, my dad's aftershave. And I just like wrote this whole thing about it, like just from hearing the song in the movie. And I do a lot of that too, where like I will hear one line from a movie or a specific thing, and I'll either write a whole song about it or like a small poem or just like a stream of consciousness writing of just like everything that it made me feel. So I love that you do that, because I think oftentimes I'm like, am I like just like so incredibly sensitive that I'm doing this all the time?
No, it just shows that you're in touch with your feelings, but you're also curious about what those feelings mean. And you want to acknowledge them, because I think that's the thing. I wrote something down recently. I was reading this book it's by Rick Rubin. It's a new book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin was famously like the founder of Def Jam Records, but it's a beautiful little book.
Yeah.
And it's all about his experience as an artist in the industry. And things that he's just taken away from it. And it applies to anybody, though. If you read it, it's so inspiring, I think.
Okay.
And this thing is filled with notes, but there's something in there. I don't remember the quote exactly, but it's like, if we aren't looking for clues, they'll pass us by without ever knowing. If we aren't looking for clues, they'll pass by without us ever knowing. Notice connections and consider where they lead. So I think that applies to so many things in life, whether it's feelings, friendships, things that happen throughout your day. Like, it reminds me to remain curious in life, to always be seeking information and not just getting upset about something, understanding why you're upset about something, or when you feel sad about something, why do you feel sad? Or when a book impacts you or a TV show impacts you in some way, like, why does it impact you? Like, to me, looking further than just that feeling, because I think so many people watch movies, TV to escape, but they don't acknowledge why they need to escape and why they're feeling the way they're feeling. So my parents, for instance, like, my stepdad might cry watching a movie, right? But he's like bottles up his feelings, and he will acknowledge that he's cried because he cries at movies a lot, but I don't think he takes the time to understand why he's crying, because he thinks it's just, well, the movie's sad. I'm like, well, the movie's not just sad. Like, your feelings this way for a reason. It strikes a chord with you. So I think, remaining curious and like when clues show up in your life, like make sure you kind of look forward, look into them deeper and try to figure out what those clues mean and where they lead, you know?
Right. Yeah. I love that. I love that a lot.
So I could talk all day.
We truly could. I mean, we have been talking all morning. It's been great.
It's been great.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Of course. Can't wait to hear it back.
Yeah. And if ever you want to go get a mocktail or do some bootleg karaoke in my friend's apartment, you are more than welcome.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll talk to you soon.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.